I think we worship the idol of control. And so surrender is the opposite of that. And we think we have control. Like we'd like to believe that we have everything within our grasp. And to some extent, yes, like we can control that we woke up this morning and the type of tea we had with our breakfast. I mean, we have choices, not like we're robots or anything, but I can't control what's going to happen to me today. I can't control the phone call that's going to come that devastates me. I can't control, a physical problem that's going to happen. I can't control that difficult relationship. But when I feel out of control, I tend to grip those things that I think I can control really tight. And basically, surrender is just letting go and saying, Lord, I think I know how to handle this. Forgive me for thinking you don't know stuff because you know way more than I do. You breathe the world into existence with words. Like last I checked, I haven't done that ever. He's so capable. And it is this surrendering or letting go of this tightly gripped control.
Hi, friends. Welcome to the Holy Shift Show. I'm your host, Christine Crawford, and I'm so glad you're here. This podcast is for anyone willing to be curious, dig deep, and be surprised by God. Well, welcome to Season 4 and the very first episode of 2026. I don't know about you, but I am ready for a fresh start and some new conversations. This year and this season, we don't have a specific theme like we did last year with Draw Near, Dwell Well, but what we do have is a fabulous guest lineup. All folks coming to join us to help us keep exploring the complexities of life, the paradoxes of faith, and how the upside-down kingdom always points the right way forward. And today's guest and topic is the perfect way to kick things off with a big dose of spiritual vertigo. Because here's the thing, most of us don't need to demand more from ourselves as much as we need to relinquish more control. It is an inconvenient truth in faith and life that we have far less control over things than we'd like, especially when it comes to the world around us and the people we share it with. Sure, there are things we can do to build big, beautiful lives and steward what's ours. But what do we do about the things that are outside of our control? What if I told you? The answer is surrender. Now, if you're stubborn and scrappy like I am, you don't like that answer one bit. But if, like me, you are also exhausted from trying to save the world, change the people, and force every circumstance to bend to your will, maybe surrender would bring some rest and relief. Maybe it can even bring joy and peace. Because maybe entrusting our lives to God is the very essence of faith and a daily invitation from God. Now, if you need some guidance for this or even some more convincing, today is your lucky day. Author Mary DeMuth is joining us to talk about how surrendering our inner lives, daily lives, past worries, and relationships is the best and only pathway to freedom. Mary has written over 50 books, including 90-Day Bible Reading Challenge. Through her podcast, Pray Every Day, and her speaking events around the globe, Mary seeks to help people heal from past trauma and live restored lives as followers of Jesus. I'm excited to chat with and learn from Mary today, and I know you'll be blessed by her wisdom too. So listen in and join us as we explore the upside-down kingdom of God as the right way forward in faith and life. Mary, I am so happy to see you today and have you back on the show. This is your second time on here. You were a delight the first time we got to talk about feeling misunderstood and the most misunderstood women in Scripture. It was fabulous. I loved that book. And today we're going to talk about another one of your books and another subject that is near and dear to my heart and also a big fat struggle spiritually. We're going to talk about surrender and this upside down idea that freedom only comes through surrender. So I'm excited to chat with you today, but thank you so much for being here.
It's great to be on again and nice to see your lovely face. And I know we have much to talk about, so I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Yes, thank you. Well, and for the people who didn't get to hear you when you were on, I guess it's been a couple years now ago, I would love if you would just take a minute to kind of share a snippet of your story. You do a tremendous amount of work in this world, and so much of it is centered on helping people find Jesus and also healing as a trauma survivor. But tell us a little more about your story and your voice and your work and what you hope you're accomplishing in the world.
Yeah, today I just wrote a Substack post that'll go out in a couple weeks. Actually, I'm a little ahead of things that I have this memory that keeps recurring when I make dinner. And it's a memory of me at a lunch in the Pacific Northwest, sitting outside in a cafe with my mom and her boyfriend, who's now deceased. And the reason I think that that memory pops up daily is it's a reminder of how far God had brought me, because there were so many times in my family of origin, especially with my mom, that I was terrified of her. And the thought of even going to have a lunch with her would stir up my stomach and make me so afraid. And I honestly, for years and decades, I was terrified of her. And this memory, even though it's a super pedestrian memory, reminds me that God does do this beautiful, slow work. And you can have, I don't know, like there's this quote that's right in front of me as I'm talking to you. It's by a lady named Miss Joan. I've never met her. She's a friend of a friend. But she said, sometimes it takes God a long time to do something suddenly. That is how I felt about that particular memory, because for years and years and years, all I would do would get anxiety when I was around my mom. And in that moment, I didn't, and now I don't. But I can't tell you like the moment that it got better. It was this slow-moving healing. And I think that's, really a testimony of my own journey of complex trauma, sexual abuse, multiple divorces, neglect, drug abuse. I mean, all the things, almost all the things happened to me. It just takes a long time to work through that. And surrender is a major part of that healing journey.
Well, it is. And the paradox is surrender requires trust, and trust is pretty much the most difficult, terrifying thing in the whole wide world for a complex trauma survivor.
Mhm.
So this is a $1,000,000 question, right? How did you find yourself able to really begin to trust the Lord and surrender to the Lord, especially given your childhood and your background and the things that you had experienced?
I think for me, and I'll say that I think the Lord just gave me this tenacious need. It was like a part of me of I had to get well. I needed to get well. I knew something was wrong. And so I think the tenacious need outweighed any fear that I had to trust God to do that. I just was so desperate for him to heal me that I didn't think, oh, is he trustworthy? I just didn't have time for that. And not that we should definitely work through those things, but at 15 years old, when I was a brand new believer, I just didn't have time for that. I was just this exceptionally broken girl who needed Jesus to help her. And so I just threw myself in headlong, and that began the process. Now, all that questioning and is God trustworthy? It all came eventually, but it just wasn't there at the beginning of the journey.
Awesome. And then as you began to have those questions and work through those, by then you were having experiences with God that had proven him good.
Yes.
So that kind of helped temper.
It did, but I still have the struggle. And, asking the question, especially as a prolonged sexual abuse victim, when I started having children, and I knew I would do anything to protect my children, and I had to ask the question, Lord, you say you love me, but you didn't protect me. I'm a human being, and I would protect my kids at all costs. So what does that mean? And so I had to sit with that for a long time. I don't have the exact answer to that question. I'm farther along in peace about it than I was before, but it was a complicated question, and the fact that I had experienced the Lord along the way didn't prevent me from having that question.
Well, thank you for your honesty there, because I think sometimes what we see in church culture, especially those of us who are in public leadership or authors and talking about the Lord all the time, I think people might assume that maybe we don't have doubts and we don't have struggles. And some of that's because sometimes people don't share those things. And that's one of the things I've always loved about your work. You've always been very honest, very vulnerable, very accessible, and just been willing to share some of the deepest, darkest things that you've had to work through and the beauty of the healing that you've been experiencing along the way. It's an inspiration for those of us who are still really fighting hard to get there.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. It's like I said earlier, it's a long healing journey, and I wish it was like, I am instantly healed, but that is not the case. And sometimes it could be like, it took one moment in time for this hellacious thing to happen. but it takes a lifetime of untangling it. And I don't like that, but that's been my journey.
I really do resent that.
Yeah.
It's not instantaneous and always, right? I feel like just even before we got on here, I was praying and I was surrendering something. And I was like, I'm going to have to surrender this 1,000 more times. And the good news is the Lord, in His mercy, allows us to do that and invites us to do that and isn't shocked by the struggle that we sometimes experience in our attempts to do that.
Yeah.
I wonder if you could share with us what you feel like surrender looks like, both maybe places you've seen it in Scripture and also what you think it looks like in our everyday lives.
It looks like Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, where He is facing the cross, He is praying, and bloody sweat is coming off His brow. And He says, I'm not looking forward to this, but not my will, but yours be done. And He surrenders His will to subjugate them to the Father's will. And now we're all talking on this podcast because He did that, because, we wouldn't be here without His sacrifice on the cross. So that's the ultimate. Also, if you look at the kenosis passages in Philippians, where He made Himself nothing, He emptied Himself, becoming the form of a man, this utter humility of not, He could have on the cross or before the cross when He was being tried, He said, I could bring down legions of angels. And He could have done that. And I think about that, like, most people, when they encounter an angel in Scripture, they're like on their face, they're freaked out. Imagine legions of them. How frightening that would be. He could have done that, but He surrendered His will to the Father. That's what He did. And so His whole life, from the moment of even being born into this world, through the blood of being born and the dependency of that, He was constantly in that act of surrender. So He's our high priest in that, teaching us what does surrender look like practically in our own lives. And why I wrote the book is, I think it gets back to that long time ago reading of The Practice of the Presence of God by Brother Lawrence, where he talks about just kind of talking with God all day long. And to me, those are conversations of surrender. Like yesterday, I had a conversation with someone that lives in a hotbed place in the United States. And his stories to me were just terrible. And when I got off that call, I had to surrender all of it because I was so overwhelmed by the pain of those stories. And again, so it's like what you just said, I have to surrender this, but I have to surrender it 1,000 times. Surrender it can be a one and done, like you can make this decision kind of like forgiveness, but often it is this cyclical journey of I surrender, help my unsurrender. I surrender, help my unsurrender.
Absolutely. And what I liked about your book, you kind of pace this out as if a 40-day devotional. So I'm even thinking this might be a really good option for somebody at Lent.
Yes. In fact, I wrote it for Lent. That was originally its purpose. So yes, it's great for Lent.
As I was reading, I'm like, this is good for Lent.
Yeah, it's good. I'm glad you saw that.
It was great. And you broke things down into categories. So our inner lives, our pasts, our relationships, our daily lives, and our worries. And I'm thinking every single one of us could pick one of those categories, if not all of those categories, and say we really struggle to give one of those up or all of those up. Why do you think that is? I kind of know why I struggle with it, but I wonder if your answer is different than my answer, or if it's kind of all the same. What do you think?
I think we worship the idol of control. And so surrender is the opposite of that. And we think we have control. Like we'd like to believe that we have everything within our grasp. And to some extent, yes, like we can control that. We woke up this morning and the type of tea we had with our breakfast. I mean, we have choices, not like we're robots or anything, but I can't control what's going to happen to me today. I can't control the phone call that's going to come that devastates me. I can't control, a physical problem that's going to happen. I can't control that difficult relationship. But when I feel out of control, I tend to grip those things that I think I can control really tight. And basically, surrender is just letting go and saying, Lord, I think I know how to handle this. Forgive me for thinking you don't know stuff because you know way more than I do. You breathe the world into existence with words. Like last I checked, I haven't done that ever. So, he's so capable. And it is this surrendering or letting go of this tightly gripped control.
It is. It's about control. And for a lot of us, the control isn't because we think we know best. It isn't, although there's some of that in there. My need for control is I just want to be safe. It comes from fear. And as a fellow trauma survivor, you understand all of that. Like, what can I do to be safe? And I think we need more control. I mean, for some of us, maybe sometimes it's wrapped up in pride, but more often I think it's wrapped up in fear, and it's related to how much we trust God. And I love the Lord, I trust the Lord, but that's a prayer that I have to pray daily and sometimes a bajillion times a day. Like, Lord, I believe, help my unbelief. Lord, I trust you, help me to trust you. I know that the Lord is good, but we live in a broken world. And we share it with broken people, and we ourselves are very broken people. And it can be a scary place to live. I mean, we're pretty insulated from some of the most terrible atrocities here in the U.S., but also we're living in a climate right now that can be pretty terrifying. And so trusting that the Lord knows best and will do best, it can be really scary, especially since best often doesn't look like we think it should. And it often does not guarantee our safety. That sometimes his goodness and our comfort or our safety are two very different things. From your chapters, the ones that touched me the most, cynicism, like surrendering to cynicism. And that's new for me, Mary. I used to be a Pollyanna. The cynicism is new and it's a bitter flavor in my mouth. I don't like it. I've got some of it right now. Our healing journeys, because again, they just don't happen as quickly as we would like. And mine is so messy and I am so over it. And our relationships, right? We can't control other people. And then particular outcomes. I think that's probably a universal one, that there's, for all of us, something we're holding on tightly. We think, if this happens, if only I can do this, it has to happen this way, then I'll feel safe, then I'll feel loved, then I'll feel whole, then I'll feel healed, then whatever, I'll be complete. Would you be willing to share any of your insights on any of those particular chapters?
Yes. Healing journey is a hard one because it does last a long time. And I think, too, we're obviously finite creatures and we're looking at the journey at this moment in time. Going back to my relationship with my mom, now in this point in time, I'm surprised at how far I've come. And I bet 10 years from now, I'll be even more surprised. And so we tend to, in America, we want an instant solution. And so when the healing journey takes a long time, we're only looking at one point in time. We're not looking to the future of all the other things that he could do. And he's existing outside of time. So he's already seen us made whole, but we don't yet see that. So that's kind of cosmological, but it's important to think about.
Hey friends, I just want to take a quick break to remind you about a few opportunities and resources available on the website. First is, if you want to overcome overwhelm and connect more deeply with God, yourself, and others, go check out the online course I created called Draw Near, Dwell Well. It's centered on soul care and spiritual formation practices like simplicity, Sabbath, and stewarding our relational and emotional health. Second, I'd love for you to book a personal shift session. These are one-on-one conversations where we can work through your challenges and questions together and determine how you might begin to make a holy shift in your faith and life. Third, I'll be hosting a handful of live workshops that combine contemplative prayer with calming mind-body practices to help us connect our theology with our biology. I've hosted a few of these already, and they're so much fun and truly restorative. I would love for you to join in on one of those. And finally, if you really want to go deep, I'm opening a few slots for one-on-one spiritual mentoring. There are 4-week, 8-week, and 12-week options, and we'll combine study, prayer, practices, and personalized guidance to help you flourish spiritually. Last note, if you want to support my work and this ministry, please consider contributing to The Holy Shift. I operate as a nonprofit in partnership with the Women's Nonprofit Alliance, so all your giving is tax deductible, and that's what makes this work possible. You can find all of this at theholyshift.org, and I've included links in the show notes. Okay, now back to the show.
And the particular outcomes is hard. I think about something a little more, pedestrian for me is my writing journey and writing books. Like, I cannot tell you how many times I felt like this publishing journey was like a game of roulette, or like a game of I'm pulling the handle and seeing if the three lemons will come up. And every time a book comes out, I'm like, maybe this will be the one, And meanwhile, you have like other books out there that maybe like aren't theologically sound, or they're just fluff and they're like selling 1.2 million copies. I just cannot predict that outcome. And I used to think naively that success would come by hard work. Like if you did the work, which I did, then you were guaranteed an outcome. And the world is too fickle and it doesn't make sense. And so I've had a lot of surrender around my career of I'm just going to be a mid-list author who sells a modicum amount of sales and hopefully finds her audience, and those people are blessed. But I cannot have the expectation ever that I will be a success in the world's eyes about this.
And what happens, I think, with these particular outcome things, well, really any of these, but especially that one, is it isn't just that thing that we want, although we want that,
Mm-hmm.
It's what the story we think that thing tells us. So now that I'm divorced and I'm counseling a lot of other women who are divorced and they're starting to date and I'm starting to think about dating, and I'm seeing a lot of like, I just have to find my person. I have to find the one, in this like fixation on doing that. And that's something I struggle with too. Loneliness is hard, but being open to finding somebody wonderful is very different than thinking I won't be complete until. And I've got a beef with the church with how we accidentally have been communicating that. But I imagine for you as an author having this career, which by the way, I've read a number of your books and where they are on a list, I don't care. They have to me. So thank you for your long obedience in that, because I've benefited from your work. But I'm guessing that when you're putting something out there, when you're putting your baby into the world, your publishers are using the same metrics as the world, right? So when it isn't doing what the world says it should do, I'm sure that can be hard. Is there a particular struggle that you have with that, like what it might mean about you or your work when it doesn't quite measure up to what you thought it would be?
Yeah, it's not like acclaim or fame. I don't want those things. It's more like a job and financially being remunerated for my hard work, because the hard work is here. The payment for it is down here. And so there's this kind of this frustration of, for the amount of work that I'm doing, I should be here, but I'm here. So I'm not complaining, because the Lord has been great to provide in supernatural ways, in lovely ways. So I'm not saying that, but it's a bit like the rug gets pulled out from underneath you. Like if I were in a different field, I can imagine I would be compensated for the amount of expertise that I have. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
And as somebody who does ministry and probably averages 12 cents an hour, because ministry is not a lucrative thing. It's one of those things where like your income does not match your output. And that can be really hard and really frustrating. That can be really hard. Not because we think we're entitled to anything, but because we have bills to pay. And we put our heart and soul into this. And it would be lovely if we didn't also have to do all these other things in order to pay our electric bill. But that, for a lot of us, that's just part of the job.
And I think a lot of people who are in either ministry or the arts, which is what you're in both, and so am I, there's a very convoluted line between the two of those when we try to connect that with the income line. And so that it's just hard. It's a hard way to make. I mean, we always hear about artists or writers who they made like $4 in their lifetime, and then they're like an international bestseller after they die. So like, there's just no We just don't know.
We don't. And I'm glad you brought up your art because that's another thing that I love about your work, that you are an artist and this book in particular. And is this the first time it's the first book of yours that I've read where you've combined the two?
It's the first, yeah. It may be the last, but it is the first.
Okay. Well, I love it. I love it because I have to see things to understand in general. And so like actually being able to put my eyes on something that tells the same story that your words tells very helpful to me. It snapshots a little better in my mind. So that's what you did. So tell the listeners a little bit about what your thought process was with that and what you were trying to do with the art.
Yeah. So actually, you mentioned Lent, and this book actually started by a Lenten practice. So for art, and why I even do art is that I have been painting a painting every day for Lent. Like that's just what I've been doing. But what I did was this was a practice that I did for Lent. And like, I surrender my burnout. So we have a flame, a fire. But the way it started was I just decided, the Lord actually said, I want you to make paintings about surrender. And every single day, I'm going to give you something to surrender and you got to paint it. And I was like, that's scary. Okay. So I did that. And then eventually IVP was interested in it and became a book, but it was tested by me first. And originally I did those paintings digitally because I wanted to try that. I hadn't done that before. And when I asked them if they wanted those digital paintings in there, they were like, no, we want them to be original. So I had to repaint them with an actual paintbrush. But the process of that has been fascinating because what I will typically do is, some of them are very logical, like I surrender my burnout with a flame, with a fire. But not all of them are that way. And so just like writing, I have to ask the Lord for a fresh metaphor that might be helpful to the person who's watching, looking, or reading. The metaphor comes first, then I paint it, and then I wrote the book around each one.
Yeah, they were great. And like you said, some of them were kind of more direct, and then some of them like came at that sideways. And it was beautiful to do that because it would ignite this other little part of my imagination where I see this particular category to surrender one way, and you broadened that for me. You gave, and again, just giving me a picture in my mind to hold was so helpful. And you're such a gifted artist, but your work is also like so accessible. You know what I mean? Like it's something we can all look at and connect with. So I think it's really powerful.
Thank you. And I hesitate to call myself an artist. I do love to paint and draw, and I love lettering and all of that. It was very vulnerable for me to put this out there because since I'm not a commercial artist, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is in the public domain. Oh, frightening. But I'm super grateful because all of this, honestly, all of it came just from the Lord and my readership. So the reason I even started selling art was 15 years ago, my readership said, we want your paintings. And I was like, that's dumb. Okay. And then a friend of mine said, you should sell them as scripture cards, like little 4x4 cards. And I was like, I could do that. That wouldn't be hard. And then that just became this Etsy shop and one of my little streams of income. But it wasn't something that I was like, oh my gosh, I just need to show the world my art. And it was all done in quiet for those 40 days of Lent for years and years and years. And then God just opened that door.
I love that. Our readers are always so good about letting what they need and what resonates. That's, I think, the most fun part about the work we do.
Yes.
Is that kind of community and the way they encourage us. Well, one thing I'd like to ask is I always like to try to highlight a specific holy shift that is needed or that might be helpful on a specific topic. So I really do love and see a holy shift, and freedom only comes from surrender. In the world that we live in, we think surrender is defeat. But really, in the upside down kingdom, surrender leads to freedom. Our victory and our freedom only come from surrender. It's a very upside down concept. What would you say, or how would you maybe add to that in terms of like why this feels so upside down or why this might be such a holy shift for us?
I can answer with a story if that's okay. I'm thinking about one of my kids right now who's a bit wayward, and I wrote a book about that called Love, Pray, Listen, Parenting Your Wayward Adult Kids with Joy. That came from the pages of my life. But one of the things that I learned that fascinates me still is that when I was in grief over the choices that the child was making, it was like right in front of my face at all times. And I didn't grieve it. I just let it stay there. And as long as I held on to this grief, I couldn't see God working. I could only despair. And I could only see negative things because it's just right there. And eventually I realized I got to let that go. I got to surrender. Not that I'm not going to grieve again. I'm sure I will. But for the major part of this, the grief of they didn't make the right choices I wanted them to make, whatever the grief is. I grieved it. I took time. I wrote some lament psalms. I talked it through. I prayed with friends. I processed the grief. And wouldn't you know it, after I processed that grief, which was its own surrender, suddenly I could see God at work in that adult child's life, almost in technicolor. And they were just little things. They weren't like, well, and then everything turned around in one moment. They were just little teeny things that because of the grief, I couldn't see those little teeny things that God was doing. Once I processed it and I surrendered it, then my eyes were opened to what God was doing. And so maybe that's helpful to someone today who may be blinded by grief and they can only see the grief. And they may need to do some work of surrender in order to begin to see God at work again. He's still working, but we can't see it when we're like,
well, and that's 100% true because grief is a form of trauma. I mean, there's neuroscience to this. Like trauma makes us very myopic. It's very, very hard to connect with God, to connect with others, to see anything but the hurt and the fear and that kind of thing. I love that you brought up grief because our dear friend, our mutual friend, Rebecca Carroll, is going to be on the show next. And we're talking about grief and grieving well. But you're so right. Like when we're drowning in that, it is hard. And surrendering grief does not mean spiritually bypassing it.
Right. No, just pretending I'm not shoving it down. Yeah.
Not at all. Not at all. I mean, grief is holy work. And I know that you've done the work. I was talking to a friend last night whose marriage is very similar to mine, but she's not able to leave. She's not in a position where she can do anything yet. And, she was like, how do I survive this thing? Do I just resign myself? I said, well, what if surrender isn't resignation? What if it's just acceptance? And I don't know that that's necessarily good advice or good theology, so we can talk about that. But, part of surrendering is surrendering this idea that I can make it different. And that doesn't mean we just roll over in defeat and resignation, although it feels like that a lot of the time. But it does mean that we accept that we are powerless to change some of our circumstances, but we are able to change some of the things, and we are able to again and again and again entrust that thing, that person, that circumstance to the Lord, who is able and willing to do all manner of wonderful things. Is that good theology to say that to heal from grief, to be willing to surrender, that there's some level of acceptance, or am I missing a component here?
I think it has to have acceptance because it is the reality of our situation that we're in. Like there was no outcome attached to my surrender of grief. I didn't say, well, I'm going to surrender this to you if you bring my wayward child back, if you save my marriage, if you change him, it's more like I'm letting go of even how this is walked out because I am at a place of detriment and I don't know how to walk it out. I'm surrendering so that you can give me, like so many times in the New Testament, it talks about don't be afraid of what you're going to say when you're drugged before authorities. The Holy Spirit will give you the words that you need in that moment. And I think this applies as well. Like don't spend your life thinking through how you're going to respond to people, but just trust that in that surrender, God is going to give you the appropriate words to say in that complicated relational minefield.
Yeah, because for those of us who are control freaks, on top of having trouble like surrendering the big thing, sometimes we have trouble surrendering like the conversation around the thing and all of the little details that surround it. And there's a reason why in my survivor communities, the first step, whether we're going to be able to leave or someone's going to try to stay well in an abusive or destructive relationship, the very first thing they do is try to help us get to the acceptance, because a lot of us are adding to our own suffering. And I think this is true with surrender. We're adding to our own suffering by being so frustrated that we can't control, so frustrated that we can't, in this case, make our spouse decide to treat us with dignity. I think you're right. I think there has to be acceptance in order to get to surrender. If someone is, let's say they're picturing a situation right now. Maybe it's a relationship, maybe it's a career, maybe it's that particular outcome. What would you say to encourage them, or what next step could they take to move a little closer to being able to surrender that to the Lord?
I think we do better in community than isolated. And so my first encouragement would be, if you have a safe person in your life, to bring this up to them and have a conversation about it. Get it out of yourself. If you don't have a safe person, at least write it down. Stick it in your journal or say it into your phone. Just get it out of you, because it's almost impossible to process something internally. It becomes kind of a hairdo, and it also becomes this whirlwind of rumination where you just spins around in circles. So finding a safe person and processing it with them is going to be a great first step.
100%. I'm remembering back to our episode on emotional health and flourishing, and we talked about when there's grief, when there's hurt, when there's trauma, when there's anything, you have to get the poison out. If you just stick it down, it really turns toxic. And so what is the way to get that out into the light where the Lord can do his work? In community, of course, is a fabulous place for that. Well, Mary, this was phenomenal. Do you have any other last words for my listeners today?
Well, first of all, you're normal, and your struggles are normal, and those listening, your struggles are normal. It takes a long time to heal from all this stuff. Try not to be frustrated, although I know that's hard. I definitely spent years of my life thinking, how long is this going to take? This is crazy. I also have some freebies. So if folks go to marydemuth.com/surrender, they can receive 12 free lock screens for their phones. That is the art from the book. So if they want to check that out, they can get that for free. And I just want to overemphasize the normalcy of how long it takes to heal.
Thank you for that. And thank you for that freebie. I'll make sure and link that up in the show notes so people can get to that. And thank you for just validating our humanity. Yeah, and just nudging us gently and humbly toward a greater surrender. So thank you, Mary.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us today. I hope that you enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. I just love Mary, and I loved the wisdom and encouragement that she shared with us today. I especially loved her reassurance that we are normal and human for struggling with surrender. Now, if you want to go deeper on surrender, make sure and check out the blog. Mary has guest posted one of the chapters from her book there. In addition to that, you'll want to check out the show notes where I've got those freebies that she mentioned linked right up. So you'll go to theholyshift.org/podcast to see the show notes and /blog to see the blog. And while you're over there, make sure and check out some of the resources and opportunities that I mentioned earlier. As always, I hope that this podcast is continuing to help us all shift our perspective on Jesus, what he taught, and why it matters. Thanks again for joining me as I explore the upside-down kingdom of God as the right way forward in faith and life.